You need to understand the moment you stop chasing is not the moment you lose them. It is the moment you stop losing yourself. Because for so long, you weren't just trying to love them, you were trying to prove that your love was worth staying for. You were trying to be patient enough, gentle enough, quiet enough, easy enough, so they wouldn't feel threatened by closeness. And the tragedy is, you can do everything right and still be treated like you're asking for too much, just because you asked for consistency. And when you finally reach that exhausted place where your hands drop and your heart says, I can't do this anymore, something powerful happens inside you. You stop performing for love and you start protecting your peace. And that shift, that silent decision, is exactly what exposes the truth for them. Because an avoidant often doesn't fully feel the weight of what they're doing while you're still there, still texting, still explaining, still forgiving, still giving them the comfort of knowing they can disappear and you'll remain. Your effort becomes the cushion that protects them from consequences. Your loyalty becomes the safety net under their distance, and your presence becomes the guarantee that they never have to sit alone with the reality of what they're risking. But when you finally step back, not as a tactic, not as a game, but as an act of self-respect, the room changes, the energy changes, the story changes, and for the first time, they are left with the one thing they've been avoiding: silence. And silence has a way of making the truth louder than any argument ever could. You need to understand this is why your absence hits different than your words, because your words gave them something to debate, something to dismiss, something to delay. But your absence gives them nothing to push against. It gives them a mirror. And in that mirror, they start to see how much you carried, how much you endured, how often you were the one bridging the gap, how often you were the one choosing love even when it wasn't being returned with the same energy. And they may not admit it out loud, but internally something starts to crack, because the version of you they felt most comfortable with was the version that kept hoping, the version that kept waiting, the version that kept making it easy for them to stay emotionally unfinished. And when you give up, they lose that comfort. They lose the reassurance that you will always be there no matter how they treat the connection. And here is the part that will sting but also set you free. They don't just feel your absence, they feel the loss of control, because your love was predictable, your forgiveness was predictable, your availability was predictable. And when something that predictable becomes unavailable, it creates panic, not always romantic panic, sometimes ego panic, sometimes control panic, but panic all the same. And in that panic, they start to replay everything. They start to wonder, did I push too far? Did I finally break something I can't fix? Is this the moment they stop caring? And you need to understand that question is the beginning of their internal collapse, because it forces them to face the reality that you were not an unlimited resource. So if you're sitting there thinking your silence makes you cruel, if you're sitting there blaming yourself for finally being tired, I want you to hear this in the most human way possible. You didn't give up because you didn't love. You gave up because love without safety becomes suffering. You gave up because constantly reaching for someone who keeps backing away slowly teaches your nervous system to live in anxiety. And you were never meant to live in anxiety just to keep someone comfortable. You were never meant to shrink your needs into nothing just to be easy to love. You were meant to be met, not managed. You were meant to be chosen, not chased. And the most powerful part of all of this, the part you need to understand, is that your giving up is not your weakness. It is your boundary finally becoming louder than your fear. It is your self-respect finally being stronger than your hope. And whether they come back or not, you have already won something priceless. You have taken your heart out of a place where it was constantly being tested, and you have brought it back to yourself, where it can finally heal, where it can finally breathe, where it can finally be loved in a way that doesn't require you to beg for the basics. You need to understand, an avoidant doesn't collapse because you suddenly became cold. They collapse because your silence removes the distraction that kept them comfortable. Because as long as you were reaching, explaining, softening, and trying, they could live inside a story where nothing was truly at risk. They could keep telling themselves, it's fine, they'll stay, this isn't serious. And you were unintentionally making it easy for them to avoid the one thing they fear most: emotional consequences, not punishment, consequences, the natural result of pushing love away until love finally stops knocking. For a long time, their distance had a purpose. Distance gave them relief. Distance gave them control. Distance gave them a way to feel safe without having to be vulnerable. And you need to understand, when someone is avoidant, closeness can feel like pressure, not because you're wrong for wanting it, but because closeness demands presence, accountability, consistency, and those things threaten the parts of them that learned early on. That needing someone is dangerous, so they keep a gap, they keep an exit door open, they keep one foot outside the relationship. And when you feel that gap, you start to compensate. You love harder, you communicate clearer, you become more patient, and slowly you start carrying a connection that was supposed to be shared. And then one day, you stop, and the silence feels like a cliff, not just for you, for them, because suddenly there is no noise, no reassurance, no emotional weather report from you, no proof that you still care. And that's when their inner world has to do something it hasn't done in a long time. It has to sit still. And sitting still is where the feelings live. It's where the guilt lives. It's where the regret lives. It's where the truth lives. And you need to understand, many avoidants don't fear love itself. They fear what love reveals about them. They fear the parts of themselves that show up when they hurt someone good, because then they can't keep pretending they're just independent. They have to face the possibility that they've been protecting themselves in a way that costs other people their peace. This is why silence is so powerful, because silence doesn't argue, silence doesn't accuse, silence doesn't beg. Silence simply holds up a mirror, and in that mirror they start to see patterns, not just what you said, but what they did, how they delayed, how they deflected, how they minimized your pain, how they disappeared when things got emotionally real, and how you kept returning anyway. And when you finally stop returning, it forces them to ask a terrifying question. What if I'm the reason this ended? Because as long as you were chasing them, they could tell themselves you were the problem, too emotional, too sensitive, too needy. But your silence removes their argument, and all that remains is the evidence. You need to understand the collapse isn't always dramatic. It can be subtle. It can look like irritability, like restlessness, like suddenly checking their phone more, like watching your social media, like thinking about you when they're alone at night, like remembering small things they used to ignore, the way you cared, the way you made space for them, the way you tried to understand them. And those memories hurt because they reveal a truth they don't want to admit, that you were not asking for perfection. You were asking for effort. You were asking for emotional presence, and they didn't give it consistently. And this is the most important part. You need to understand, their collapse is not your responsibility. You don't have to rescue them from the feelings they avoided. You don't have to rush in because you feel guilty for being silent. You don't have to soften your boundary just because they finally started feeling what you felt for months. Because if they truly want to grow, they must be able to sit in that discomfort without turning you into the solution. Because you are not a rehab center for someone who refuses to do the work. You are a person with a heart, with limits, with a life, with dignity. So if you're thinking, maybe I should reach out so they don't hurt, remember, you were hurting while you were still there, and you still showed up, you still tried, and your pain didn't move them into change, because change doesn't happen when someone is being chased. It happens when they finally feel the cost of their patterns, and your silence is not revenge, it is truth. It is the consequence of love that was taken for granted, and it is the beginning of the only kind of growth that lasts, growth that comes from facing yourself, not from being saved by someone who loved you too much. You need to understand, your power was never in the arguments you won, the paragraphs you typed, the tears you cried, or the patience you proved. Your power was always in what you were willing to tolerate, because tolerance teaches people how to treat you, and for too long you tolerated uncertainty, mixed signals, emotional distance, and long silences that made you feel like you had to earn the right to be loved. And the painful truth is, the avoidant often becomes comfortable not because they don't care, but because your loyalty becomes predictable, and predictability without boundaries turns into permission. You need to understand, when you keep showing up for someone who keeps pulling away, you unintentionally hand them the steering wheel of your emotional life. Your mood becomes dependent on their replies. Your peace becomes dependent on their effort. Your confidence becomes dependent on their consistency. And slowly, without realizing it, you start negotiating with yourself. If I'm calmer, they'll stay. If I'm easier, they'll open up. If I don't bring it up, we won't fight. And that is not love. That is self-erasure dressed up as hope. That is you shrinking your needs so they don't feel pressured. And you need to understand you were not born to be small so someone else can feel safe. And here's where your real power begins. It begins the moment you choose peace over proof, the moment you stop trying to convince someone that you are worth consistency, because you need to understand the right person does not require convincing. The right person may have fears, may have wounds, may have imperfections, but they will not repeatedly make you feel like love is something you must chase down like a runaway train. They will meet you, they will communicate, they will care about the impact they have on you. And if someone doesn't care about the impact, you can't love them into caring. You can't bleed enough to make them appreciate blood. This is why boundaries are so threatening to an avoidant, because boundaries remove the option to take you for granted. Boundaries remove the option to vanish and return without consequence. Boundaries remove the option to keep the relationship in a half-alive state where they get comfort and you get confusion. And when you finally enforce a boundary, not with anger, not with insults, but with quiet firmness, it changes the whole dynamic, because your boundary says, I will not keep paying the emotional price for your fear. Your boundary says, I will not keep auditioning for love. Your boundary says, if you want access to me, you must show up with respect. And you need to understand that kind of self-respect feels like a loss of control to someone who depended on your flexibility. And that's why the moment you stop tolerating the bare minimum, the avoidant starts to feel something that looks like fear, respect, and confusion all at once. Because you are no longer available to the old pattern, you are no longer the person they can keep in their pocket, the person they can reach for when they're lonely and ignore when they're overwhelmed. And you need to understand this is not you becoming cold. This is you becoming clear. This is you becoming someone who requires emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is expensive for someone who has been living on emotional shortcuts. The boundary you set might be as simple as silence, as simple as not replying immediately, as simple as not chasing, as simple as not asking, are we okay? Every time they pull away. And you need to understand the moment you stop doing that, you stop feeding the pattern, because the pattern was never just their avoidance. The pattern was also your over-functioning, your over-explaining, your over-giving, and none of this is to blame you. It's to free you, because once you see your part, you regain your power. You can choose differently. You can stop running towards someone who keeps backing away. So if you're sitting there wondering, will they respect me if I walk away? You need to understand, respect doesn't start in them. It starts in you. It starts in what you accept. It starts in what you allow. And when you finally decide, I will not be treated like an option, something inside you becomes unshakable, because you no longer fear losing them more than you fear losing yourself. And that is the moment your life changes, because whether they come back or not, you have already done the bravest thing. You have chosen dignity over desperation. You have chosen peace over chaos. You have chosen yourself. And that is the kind of power that no avoidant pattern, no mixed signal, no disappearing act can ever take from you again. You need to understand, if they come back, it will not automatically mean they have changed. It will not automatically mean they finally get it. And it will not automatically mean your pain is now validated, because people can return for many reasons, and not all of them are love. Sometimes they return because they miss the comfort you gave. Sometimes they return because loneliness finally got louder than their pride. Sometimes they return because your absence bruised their ego. And sometimes they return because they genuinely saw what they lost. But you need to understand, you cannot build your future on a guess. You cannot hand your heart back to someone just because they knocked. You have to look at what they bring with them when they knock. Because the truth is, the avoidant can be very convincing in the beginning. They can sound emotional. They can sound sincere. They can say the words you begged to hear when you were crying in silence. And you need to understand, words are easy when the fear of losing you is fresh. Words are easy when the guilt is awake. Words are easy when they're afraid you've moved on. But consistency is what reveals character, not intensity. And you are not looking for intensity. You are looking for reliability. You are not looking for a dramatic apology. You are looking for changed behavior, and you need to understand behavior is the only apology that has weight. So when they return, watch what happens after the first wave of emotion. Watch what happens after you soften, after you forgive, after you answer the message, after you meet up, after the excitement fades, because that is where the truth lives. If they return with panic, they will calm down as soon as they feel they have you again, and then they will slowly slide back into the same habits, the same distance, the same disappearing, the same "I'm busy" excuses, the same avoidance, and you will find yourself right back in that familiar place, trying to prove, trying to earn, trying to hold a connection together with your bare hands. And you need to understand, you cannot keep doing that to yourself and call it love. But if they return with growth, it will look different, it will feel different, it will sound different. Because growth doesn't demand instant access to you. Growth doesn't pressure you to just trust me. Growth doesn't get offended when you ask questions. Growth doesn't act like your boundaries are a punishment. Growth understands that trust is rebuilt in small moments over time, with humility, with patience, with accountability. And you need to understand, someone who is truly changed will not rush you. They will respect the fact that you are healing from the very thing they did. You need to understand, this is where your discernment becomes everything, because you are allowed to want them, you are allowed to miss them, you are allowed to remember the good moments and feel your heart pull. That is human, that is love, that is attachment, but you are also allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to require effort. You are allowed to require consistency. You are allowed to say, I'm not giving you the whole of me just because you're finally feeling the loss. Because you need to understand, your heart is not a prize someone wins for showing up late. Your heart is not something they get back because they regret it now. Your heart is sacred, and it deserves to be handled with care. And if you're the person who fears that holding your boundary will push them away, I want you to hear this clearly. You need to understand, a boundary only pushes away the version of them that wanted convenience. And if convenience is all they wanted, then losing them is not a tragedy. It is a rescue, because the person who truly loves you will rise to meet your boundary, not run from it. The person who truly values you will not ask you to be smaller so they can feel bigger. They will not ask you to accept less so they can do less. They will not ask you to lower the standard just because they feel uncomfortable. They will step up because losing you would be too high a price for their old habits. So if they come back, let it be slow, let it be real, let it be proven, let it be built on truth, not urgency. Let it be built on actions, not promises. And if they do not have the courage to show up consistently, then you need to understand the purpose of their return was never to love you properly. It was to soothe themselves, and you were not put on this earth to be someone's temporary comfort while they refuse to become someone safe. You need to understand, the moment you stop accepting a half love, you make space for a full one. And whether that full love comes from them after real change or from someone new who meets you with maturity, your job is the same. Protect your peace, honor your worth, and never again confuse someone's attention with someone's commitment. You need to understand, the most powerful turning point in your life is not the day they finally text you with the words you begged for. It's not the day they suddenly realize your value. It's not the day they come back with tears and urgency, because even that can still leave you stuck in the same loop, hoping they stay, fearing they vanish, measuring your worth by their mood. The real turning point is the day you look at your own heart and you decide, with shaking hands and a tired soul, that you are no longer available for half love. That is the day you stop auditioning. That is the day you stop proving. That is the day you stop trying to be chosen by someone who only wants you when you're convenient, and you choose yourself, not in arrogance, not in bitterness, but in dignity, because you finally understand that love is not supposed to feel like you're constantly losing yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You need to understand, choosing yourself does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop abandoning your needs to keep a connection alive. It means you stop romanticizing inconsistency. It means you stop calling confusion chemistry. It means you stop thinking that your loyalty has to be proven through suffering, because you can miss them and still know they weren't safe for you. You can love the idea of who they could be and still accept who they are right now. You can remember the good moments and still be honest about the pattern that followed them, The disappearing acts, the silence, the emotional coldness, the way you were always the one trying to repair, the way you were always the one explaining your pain, as if pain needs a permission slip. Choosing yourself is not a dramatic speech. It's quiet. It's the moment you don't send the message. It's the moment you don't chase the conversation. It's the moment you don't panic when they pull away. It's the moment you breathe and you say, I will not trade my peace for someone's uncertainty. And this is where it gets real, because you need to understand your nervous system has been trained by inconsistency. You got used to the highs and lows, the warmth and the withdrawal, the closeness and the sudden distance, and your body started to mistake that roller coaster for love because unpredictability makes you obsess, it makes you overthink, it makes you chase, and you confuse that chase with passion. But when you choose yourself, you start building a different addiction: calm, stability, self-respect, the kind of love that doesn't make you doubt your worth at 2 a.m., the kind of love that doesn't punish you for having feelings, the kind of love that doesn't require you to shrink. And yes, at first, calm can feel boring to someone who has been living in emotional chaos, but you need to understand boring is not the enemy. Boring is peace. Boring is safety. Boring is your body finally unclenching after months of tension. You need to understand when you choose yourself, you also stop negotiating with disrespect. You stop accepting apologies without change. You stop allowing someone to access your softness while refusing to show up with maturity. You stop being flattered by attention and start requiring consistency. And that is why, when you finally choose yourself, the whole dynamic changes because you're no longer reacting, you're deciding. You're no longer waiting, you're living. You're no longer hoping they'll become the person you need. You're becoming the person you promised yourself you'd protect. And the truth is, the moment you stop being available for half love, you become the kind of person who either gets met at your level or gets left by anyone who can't rise. And either outcome is a win, because you are no longer a place where someone can come to rest while you do all the emotional heavy lifting. You need to understand, you don't need them to validate your worth, because your worth was never waiting in their hands, and you don't need their regret to heal you, because healing is not something they grant you, it's something you choose. One boundary, one brave decision, one honest moment at a time, until the day you look back and realize you stopped begging for love the moment you started believing you deserve it.